It's funny, like I don't like speaking in front of people, and my watch just said, "You need to breathe in and breathe out and just calm down," which won't actually stress me out more. So I work for Hello R as a startup. We've been going for 3 years and focused on conversational AI. So we've run chatbots in about 24 different countries and about, I think, 16 different languages, and it works really well. I'm not going to talk too much about conversational AI because I think there's speakers following me that'll be talking about that and text processing. So I'm just going to maybe give almost some edge cases focusing more on media creation. So like my journey or our journey started in generative AI probably like a year and a half ago, just looking on LinkedIn. I think everyone probably looks on LinkedIn all the time. And I saw people literally creating gaming backgrounds which were really elaborate and incredible. And they said, all I did was type this and look what I've created. So I sort of had to find out what that thing was, and that thing was Midjourney, and sign up and go onto the wait list, and creating demand and scarcity and all that sort of stuff. And it was just, I was just amazed. I mean, it did seem magical to start with, and so being, I guess, in a data science role, first thing I did was obviously hack Discord and download, I think, about 100,000 prompts just to see what people wanted. And what people wanted was realism, which was interesting. Everyone talks about this uncanny valley and, oh my goodness, talking to an AI or this. But when you actually look at what people want, they want this thing to be realistic. And they want, if you're talking to a bot, you want to feel like you're talking to a person. And that's where I think things are going, and uncanny valley be damned. So that's where we started, and we just like probably some people in this room, we started using it to create, because we were running chatbots, the actual chatbot images, and we started using generative AI for our presentations because, I mean, we weren't going to pay iStock Photo a license fee. We were using the free stock photo sites, and they're terrible, and you see them in every single presentation, the same 4 photos that everyone chooses. I think what was amazing about generative AI is you could try and land a point, and you could visualize the point you're trying to land, and you could make sure when you're storytelling through a presentation that everything was consistent and telling that story. So I mean that's where we started. And then I've been playing around with earlier versions of OpenAI, but they're interesting but mostly nonsense. It's like, well, this could be good one day. That was sort of the feeling. It wasn't really useful for data processing. Maybe it was useful for showing off that you knew something about AI, but I think when 3.5 landed, it really did change everything. All of a sudden this thing was making sense, it was practical, and it was scary, and obviously, a big chunk of the, I don't know, technology world thought so too. So we've been incorporating the ChatGPT into a lot of what we do. We're a small agency, and it really just gives you superpowers, I think, these programs, if used properly. And by properly, I mean, you've got to look at whether this thing is introducing bias or whether it's truthful and not taking things at face value. But you can work around that mathematically, I think. So like, in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and I was scared when Sam Altman left, because I was like, oh my goodness, I'd literally have to delete this presentation and go, but we can use Llama too, and we can use, I think, Anthropic. But I've tried those things and they're terrible, and they're a long way behind. So I was like, oh. And also the other thing is OpenAI is basically subsidizing people like us to use AI. It's cheap. If you use Llama or one of these models and you run that yourself, it's expensive and it uses up a lot of power. That said, every time you do a chat GTP, you're using up 5 litres of water to cool servers down, which is sort of interesting. So like most of the time we're doing it for text analysis. We're a conversational AI company, and when you have a new person starting, the first thing people go is, oh my goodness, how are you going to process 100,000 verbatims? So we use OpenAI to help with that. We use it to, I would say, like, create measures that were not formerly possible. I think what's exciting about this technology is not so much you can make what we used to do efficient, it's about what we can do in the future. So an example would be in CRM, normally it's like, it's like a negative or positive thing you're going to do, and you're going to have a graph. But now you can say, well, of all those CRM comments, just tell me how actionable it is to fix this problem and score that instead and give me some advice. So all of a sudden you're going from data to action to quantification, things you would struggle to do easily, and that's all just by a prompt. So that's mostly what we do. Media I've talked about, which is generating images and ideas. I'm going to give a concrete example. And in code, I think like anyone can be a Python coder in a way, and it's actually quite useful if you're in a small company, because you just need to know the rough structure of what code is, and then you can ask ChatGPT to help. So I use it to help me fix problems generally, but I'll show you some more sophisticated examples. So the things I'm going to show is like how you can use it as a data integration partner. So in a way, for me, like you hear the word co-pilot all the time, I use it a lot for co-piloting purposes. It's a concept generation. You can generate hundreds or thousands of concepts, reasonably good concepts, quickly. You can design with it. I've mentioned the writing the software, and you can prototype, but it's not just like a prototype of here's a picture of something. It could be a working website, semi-functioning, almost instantly generated, and in the case I'm going to show, like an intelligent beauty assistant you can talk to and get tips and test. None of this was possible like a year ago. It's possible, but just not cost effectively possible. So here's like the first example. This is from quite an old study. We were doing research in Kenya and South Africa around what should a brand do to get traction on TikTok, because what you find if you look at traffic stats is that brands are terrible at it and influencers are brilliant at it, thus most brands using influencers. So in this example, we used, old machine learning to look at all the TikToks that Kylie Jenner, it was actually quite a lot of influencers and brands, and versus Nivea. So what are the things they're doing in their videos? What objects do they show? How do they make these things? So I've got like two examples, Nivea versus Kylie Jenner, and just to see, is there anything we can learn from an influencer to mean a brand is better on TikTok? So that's, just two bar charts. So like, rather than doing anything exhaustive, and I did this example for today, as I just said, just compare, ChatGPT, what are the main differences between Kylie Jenner and Nivea, the image tags. And it actually surprised me. It was really cleverly picked out that, like Kylie she's a brand, and she was composing her images very carefully. They're very style conscious. You're focusing on selfie, focusing on her lips, focusing on like images within the image. So this is like ceilings, and I didn't generate anything from car, but just this whole idea of selfie and glamour. So she's very carefully composing her TikToks versus Nivea, which is probably following a brand guideline, which means there's almost zero traction for them. So I guess the idea is, so now we can see differences between these two, between Kylie Jenner and Nivea. What can we do with that data? Well, we can generate concepts, and we can do this at a vast scale. So in this case, I just asked ChatGPT to create me a 3-scene TikTok in the style of an influencer of these attributes, and I just took the differences from that chart and put them in here. So again, this could be done programmatically. And then I just described what the video needed to be, and the purpose was that, the moisturizer was about looking good and living a busy life. So then, bang, straight into ChatGPT. And then, so ChatGPT here has created all the scenes and described them. And this is just like one example. Obviously, with tuning, you can make this scale ridiculously well. And so without, going into these things, it's giving me the dialogue. Maybe it's a little bit cheesy because this is just like one take without really thinking about it. It's describing the images. Then it's like automatically building the images straight away. So I think it's like quite impressive as this concept creation partner. And, it's still quite raw, but it's getting better and better and better. And then the next you can do, and this is like even more raw, is just say, or just like animate it a little bit. So I mean, they're only subtle little movements, and this, remember, this is one go, but it's a very, very subtle. But the thing I have seen that really interests me is when people are doing architectural plans in generative AI and actually put people into them and they're moving around. It's amazing how, like, if you're buying a house off the plans and you could visualize that and you can see people moving through, like how much more impactful that is. And that's all sort of brought to life by generative AI. The second thing, and I presented this at ESMA in Singapore last week, was like, I'm not a designer at all. I've got zero design talent. I can't even draw a stick person that looks good, realistically. So in this case, we built a 3D environment, I guess a metaverse environment. But in a very short, this is all built and visualized within 2 weeks, because in market research, you're not going to be able to say to someone, we're going to recreate your entire beauty department and we're going to launch it and test it and bring people in 2 weeks. Formally not possible and way too expensive. In this case, I used it as a design partner. So it was like, well, I initially thought, well, let's make some cool pop-up stores. So you can see on the left, there's some sort of like crazy ideas there. And then the middle idea was like, well, we need to house an entire beauty department. Can we just have like a building with an interesting shape or pattern on it? Let's do that in a nice outdoor area where people can meet and learn find out about the tasks they need to do. And then on the right-hand side, this is what the designer built. So that was all within the space of 2 weeks. And I think the point here is that generative AI is allowing me to communicate to a designer in their language. When I would not have been able to do that before. It would have been this horrid PowerPoint with a whole lot of nonsense description. And so generative AI in this case has just reduced timelines to almost nothing. And so I'm just going to quickly show you the build environment. And that, it goes to infinity, but if you actually walk off the end, you actually fall back into the environment, so you can never escape. So, you can see here, just walking in, and that's the entire, like Woolworths, that South African beauty department, done very, very quickly. So hopefully I can. All right, the next thing I'm talking about just quickly is rapid prototyping. So this is where I'm talking about, it is not just an image or a video you're creating, it's actually a working thing. And in this case, for this paper, we wanted to create an AI assistant, put it into the metaverse and let people actually talk to it, because the real idea was to see how people relate to an AI, like that's actually using GPT in the background, because it's just interesting to see whether people are upset by it, whether they liked it. That's what we wanted to test. So this rapid prototype took me, I say 2 days, but realistically probably about 4 hours end to end. So I guess this is an example of it's like a prototyping partner, and again, it was writing Python code for me to do this, and I'm not a Python coder. I can write hello world, that's it. So what we did, like the way she looks, that was generated. What I did was I took a staff member from the company I'm dealing with and put her into Midjourney, her image, and then just rendered this. So it is no specific person, but it is inspired by a staff member. Then I connected into GPT-4 so it can intelligently respond to user queries. And finally, it was sitting on a very small database, so a product database. So she knew about, 5 or 6 products and all their attributes. So again, this is like a coding partner and a prototyping partner. And her brain was literally just a prompt, which was just saying, you need to respond to skin queries. You need to respond quickly. I think if people have used GPT, you'll probably find sometimes it writes 2 pages about anything. Like how are you going? It's like that. So like you need to instruct in terms of you need to tell it what response you require. And I think OpenAI has released more tools so you can train the thing so it can respond better and more in line with a brand. And then obviously by the time I'd done and tested this prototype, I found out I'd probably done everything the wrong ways. But it still worked, because what you should be doing is like doing a query, like almost like just a search query, getting that back, and then rendering that in a sensible way based on the history of a conversation and some Brad guidelines. That's the way you should actually do it. So like I can't, unfortunately
Hello there.
I was going to go off here.
Absolutely.
Whoops, sorry. So I just said hi, and I'm just talking about my skin being very dry, which sometimes. I'm not sure if you can hear this though.
Absolutely. Extremely dry
Can you hear
skin
that?
can be quite
So
bothersome, but with the right moisturizing products, this issue can be easily managed. In a moisturizer, look for ingredients like hyaluronic acid, which is a wonderful hydrating ingredient. It pulls in water molecules
but you get
from
the idea.
environment and binds them to your skin, ensuring long.
But I guess the point is that, you know, I managed to create that very, very quickly. It's reasonably smart. I mean, sometimes, I don't know if people have used code interpreter. There's a thing called code interpreter in ChatGTP. I think it's called data analytics now. But it's scarily smart what it can do. And it's sort of like as an example, I uploaded like the World Bank climate data and just wanted to look, you know, just graph the trend, which is obviously slowly but scarily going like that in terms of the global temperature. But then I said, well, is there any places in the world which are impacted worst? And I had an assumption that it would be like like tropical countries where it's already hot. But I was completely wrong. It's near the poles is where the worst impact of climate change hits, which is also a bit of a worry for these poles mounting very quickly. But I would have never thought of that unless I was like a climate researcher. I wouldn't have known to ask that. I just said, well, just tell me about the data. So I think what generative AI means is that you can go from like, I think one of the problems market research has is actually communicating with end clients. For instance, here's some market research. Hello marketer, here's some graphs and some recommendations, and here's a 50-page report. Whereas I think with generative AI, instead of like telling people, you can just show them, here's what your ad should look like, here's a style guide, here's the things that are working, and here's roughly what it would look like. So I think generative AI sort of gives almost like superpowers at communicating to different audiences. And with that, that's it.
Thank you very much. I sorry, go back right here. I had a question about the design aid one with the Woolworths. The images on the left, were they completely generated by AI, or were they found on the internet?
No, everything's generated. So I literally just said, I want a trendy glass pop-up store on the streets of Paris. It was one of them, as the prompt. And so, you know, you probably iterate for about an hour until you get some reasonable images, and then you sort of think about it. Yes, but everything generated, yeah.
Cool. Okay, questions?
Hiya, Jack Wilson from 2TV. I think, as you said, like generative AI art often requires quite a lot of kind of iterations to get exactly what you have in mind. To what extent do you think it's important to sort of have a manual interface built on top of these generative tools? Because I do see that there's a bit of an issue with you sort of have to keep generating fresh every time to do stuff, but actually having something that's attached to an editor, I think, is really important. Is that something that you are building at Hello Hour? Is it something that you think is important, or do you think it should always be freshly generated?
Yeah, I mean, like I'm not going to build any interface to make the images better, but I think because I'm using Midjourney, and I think DALL-E, I've almost dropped that because of Sam again. Sam again is a bit of a panic, but I think they're solving those problems. One of the things I'd like to do is like connect straight into these APIs and straight into these systems, and not through an intermediary, because then I sort of get the full superpowers as things are updated. But Midjourney is building a nicer interface, because if you know it at the moment, it's just this endless sort of command prompt to get your images. But no, I think for me, I'm going to be trying to do things programmatically the whole time. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, Jack from Zappy. How easy are you finding it to get stylistic consistency via the use of prompt on these tools? So if you always want your images to look, consistently similar via Midjourney, are you able to, via your prompts, achieve that, or do you get quite a lot of differences, from prompt to prompt in the outputs that you're getting?
To be honest, I think one of the problems with Midjourney is there's no API at the moment, so it's manual, whereas DALL-E is programmatic. But what you can do is you can upload seed images into Midjourney, so you can control the style that way and along with the prompts. And again, you see the best people at Midjourney are photographers generally, or artists, which again I'm not. So you sort of learn from the open discussion. I think that's currently the consistency is a problem, but sometimes it's the opposite. It's like it's always giving me the same thing. For some more niche cases, especially around brand and product, it's still really niche in the scheme of things, because everyone's sort of just trying to make gamer characters, if you look. I think that's it. But again, around the programmatic side, you've got that thing called temperature. So if you're using an API on GPT, you can change the temperature. So the higher the temperature, the more random it is. So I think, to be honest, it's not much of a concern, because these are sort of quite edge cases.
Thank you.
Do you have a final question? Oh yeah, back row. 2.
Hi. Are you ever kind of doing a bit of a feedback loop between the models? So you could use ChatGPT to generate your prompt, and then you throw it into DALL-E. Have you ever done anything kind of down that line, and how did it go?
Yeah. So it's like if you use that system with ChatGPT now, I think it's fully integrated, so it'll create prompts. It does it in a very different style, for DALL-E. And yeah, totally. I think I remember on LinkedIn, everyone was sort of doing that, creating a prompt here and then popping it into Midjourney to visualize. So definitely. I think the great thing about GPT is actually you get a big description about the prompt. It'll create a really detailed description, which you can just alter via, I guess, by chat. Whereas Midjourney, it's a lot more. You need to know photography terminology.
How are you getting on with the prompting process? Are you finding it a little bit inattentive, some of the details? How do you overcome that type of challenge with the way if you learn, more of a generalised learning about prompt writing, but you got any tips you can share on that front? Because when I write things, it seems to ignore the things in the middle of the sentence.
Yeah, I think because I think you've got to think when you're writing a prompt, you're actually booking compute on a server. So the more detailed and more maybe if there's some ambiguity in your prompt, I think you're using more server time up. So you've sort of, I think I think maybe Sam Altman was talking. Right now it's about reasonably short, maybe apart from summarization, but short and well-contained tasks, but mostly just about iteration. It's just about iteration. And then if you're using the API, you get more control, so then you can vary the temperature. So if you want this thing to think or be a little bit more random, if you're generating concepts, you just increase the temperature. But I think mostly it goes well it's going well, yeah.
Okay, we have a question online.
Hi. So we've got Sinead Jeffries online, and she's asked a question about the AI bots that you have, and how do people respond to it? So how do real people respond versus to a norm in-person response?
So it went really well. What was it? Because part of that study was trying to look at, there's 2 different types of shoppers, one shopper who just wants to get in and shop and get out as fast as possible, and the other one who just wants to learn. So that's who we were researching. We find that this is back to control. is that thing, they were just worried, the people who didn't like it were going, this thing's just talking too much, you know, it's saying too much, so whereas the people who are exploring more work really well. So like one of the learnings is obviously to try and tailor the response based on like a shopper profile. But no, it went really well. I think people, especially for sensitive skin issues, I think the idea of talking to a bot rather than a sales assistant, because often, look, I don't go into beauty departments very often, in fact, only because of that project. But I think from the research, a lot of people are intimidated because the beauty assistants are often perfect. They're going in, you're going in with a skin condition and talking to someone with a perfect complexion. So I think there were some benefits to talking to an AI and having like a detailed conversation for sure.
Okay, David, thank you very, very much.